In this video, we're going to focus the Bible GPS on Acts 9 verses 1 to 20, and that's the famous passage of Paul's conversion on his way to Damascus. So in the GPS method, we realize that there is a difference between the people of the Bible in Acts chapter 9 and the people in the 21st century, and the differences are language, tradition, time, situation, and history. And in the GPS method, we will go through three major processes to help us to overcome these differences. The first one, understanding. That takes us to the message to the original receiver. After determining that, we see if it's possible to apply this message, or do we need to just leave it where it is. And if we realize it's applicable, we communicate it in the 21st century. So let's start with the first process, which is understanding. And the purpose of this process is to get to the message to the original receiver. And as we've seen in the other videos, we're going through the acronym of START in the process of understanding. The S is the situation. It's always good to know what's the background of this passage. And then we also determine the type of literature, because you cannot read poetry like prose. And that will help us to analyze this passage. And in the process of analysis, we also reach to the conclusion of what the message to the original receiver was. And after reaching that, we do a test to see if it relates to the rest of the Bible. And we do another test, and we can read Bible commentaries and study Bibles just to test your findings. So this is the acronym of START. It takes us to the message to the original receiver. So let's start with the situation. Normally you can get the situation within the passage, and in this instance you get it in verse 1 and 2. Saul was eager to kill the Lord's followers, so he went to the high priest asking for his cooperation in the arrest of any followers of the Lord. So Paul wants to persecute the church. And then we ask the type of literature, because the literature will determine how we will analyze the passage. And we see in this instance it's prose, and it's a narrative, and narratives can be subdivided in stories, allegories, and history, and in this case it's a story. So it's prose, narrative, and story. And now we will dig into the passage, and we do that by analyzing the passage. And we know that stories are divided in episodes, and an episode is just a chain of events that are related, they have the same location, time, and major participants. And then secondly, we determine the plot structure and main theme. The plot is just the way the story develops to keep the interest of the reader. And then thirdly, we conclude and summarize the message to the original receiver. So let us go through this step of analysis on Acts chapter 9 verse 1 to 20. And we see in verse 1 that Saul kept on threatening to kill the Lord's followers. He even went to the high priest and asked for letters to the Jewish leader in Damascus. So we can see in verses 1 and 2 there is huge tension. Saul persecutes the church. And then from verse 3 we read, when Saul had almost reached Damascus, a bright light from heaven suddenly flashed around him. He fell to the ground and heard a voice that said, Saul, Saul, why are you so cruel to me? Who are you? Saul asked. I'm Jesus, the Lord answered. I'm the one you are so cruel to. Now get up and go into the city, where you will be told what to do. So we can see this is the relief of tension, the Damascus experience. We continue to verse 9. And for 3 days he was blind and did not eat or drink. And that is the result. He was struck with blindness. This is the first episode in this narrative. Now we're going to the second episode. It starts with verse 10, because it's a different location and another main character, which is Ananias. Now, Ananias lived in Damascus, and the Lord appeared to him in a vision and told him that he needed to go and see a guy with the name of Saul. But he was a bit scared, because we read in verse 13. Ananias replied, Lord, a lot of people have told me about the terrible things this man has done to your followers in Jerusalem. Now the chief priests have given him the power to come here and arrest anyone who worships in your name. So Ananias was a bit scared to meet Paul. But then the Lord said to Ananias, Go, I have chosen him to tell foreigners, kings, and the people of Israel about me. I will show him how much he must suffer for worshipping in my name. This is just the Lord's way to comfort Ananias, and there is the relief of tension. And now we get the last few verses. Let's read from verse 18. Suddenly something like fish scales fell from Saul's eyes, and he could see. He got up and was baptized. Then he ate and felt much better. For several days Saul stayed with Lord's followers in Damascus. Soon he went to the Jewish meeting places and started telling people that Jesus is the Son of God. What's the result? A persecutor becomes a follower of Jesus Christ. And now we need to conclude and summarize the message. We've divided the story in episodes. We realize there are 2 episodes. We've determined the plot structure and main themes. So what will the message be? And we realize the message is always implied when it comes to a story. Well, I got to this short message. Everyone, good and bad, rich and poor, needs God's grace. Although Paul was a great guy, he was in need of God's grace. And now step number 4. We relate this message to the broader biblical and theological framework. Does it relate to the rest of the Bible? Well, if you read Ephesians 2, it says in verse 8, For it's by grace you have been saved through faith. And then we read in Romans 3, Therefore no one will be declared righteous in God's sight by the works of the law. Rather, through the law we become conscious of our sin. For we maintain that a person is justified. Justified is just another way to say to be put right with God. We are justified by faith. I just want to go back to the previous verse. Let's go to verse 9. We are not saved by works. Why not? So that no one can boast. So we see that message relates to the rest of the Bible. And let's go to number 5. We test our findings by reading other commentaries and study Bibles, and I promise you we will be on the right track. The Bible study Bibles will confirm that everyone needs God's grace. Now we go to the next step, which is application. Is this message applicable or not? And we know that we determine 2 things. If it's incidental, it's not applicable because it's cultural, ceremonial, and civil. If it's essential, it means it's moral. It is applicable because something that's moral in the Bible is applicable. Was applicable those days, and it's still applicable and will always be applicable because it's a universal truth. You can say it's an essential. So in this case, we realize it is definitely essential. Therefore, we can communicate it in the 21st century. Now we can focus maybe on a small group, a Bible study group, and maybe before I have some questions for you, we can read on page 157 from Hearing God's Tweet, a devotional about what is so amazing about God's grace. I read for you, the Apostle Paul loves to use the word grace, but what is so amazing about grace? Philip Yancey tells the story of C.S. Lewis during a British conference on comparative religions. Experts from around the world debated what, if any, belief was unique to the Christian faith. They began eliminating possibilities. Incarnation. Other religions had different versions of God's appearing in human form. Resurrection. Again, other religions had accounts of return from death. The debate went on for some time until C.S. Lewis wandered into the room. "What's this rumpus about?" he asked, and heard in reply that his colleagues were discussing Christianity's unique contribution among world's religions. Lewis responded, "Oh, that's easy. It's grace." After some discussion, the conferees had to agree. The notion of God's love coming to us free of charge, no strings attached, seems to go against every instinct of humanity. The Buddhist Eightfold Path, the Hindu doctrine of karma, the Jewish covenant, and the Muslim code of law, each of these offers a way to earn approval. Only Christianity dares to make God's love unconditional. And this I got from the wonderful book, What is So Amazing About Grace by Philip Yancey on page 45. And then there is the quote of the day. Grace is given to heal the spiritually sick, not to decorate spiritual heroes. And you can maybe discuss these questions in a small group. You can pause this video to focus on these 5 questions. You can also visit my website www.free-biblestudy.com for more information, and you can also get access to the 2 devotionals, The Bible as Your GPS and Hearing God's Tweet. The principles I teach in this Bible course are embedded in the Bible as Your GPS devotional.